There are few monsters who have captivated people enough to keep them glued to their misadventures for over a century, and fewer still who have had a whole species spawn out. Vampires, our favorite blood-sucking parasites, have made this towering mark with ease. Over the long run, the vampire lore and look have evolved from the classic Bram Stoker-style Dracula to modern types, some hideous like the Stryi, and others stunning and flawless like Edward Cullen of the Twilight saga. Vampires have branched out of their original classy evil skin into a motley of avatars. We've got scruffy beasts, a kid next door vampire, half vampires, high school vampires, and even funny ancient roomies as vampires. With this ever-swelling list of vampires, each of them sharing canonical traits, but also carving out their own unique space, it is time we go over to the dark side and check out 20 different vampires in movies and TV, their monstrosity levels, and their vulnerabilities. But before we jump in, we have a small request. Please support us by subscribing to our channel. It is a small click for you, but it means a lot to us. Thanks. Let us kick off the list with the OG Prince of Darkness.
Living blood.
Traditional Gothic vampire, Bram Stoker's Dracula. Bram Stoker's novel, Dracula, has spawned a sea of Dracula films and media. From the iconic Hammer films to the 1992 Bram Stoker's Dracula by Francis Ford Coppola, Dracula's claim as the king of vampires has been sealed and locked. Dracula's story is one of an ancient evil driven by a violent lust and the courageous few who stand against him. It all began with Jonathan Harker riding up to Transylvania to finalize a property deal with Count Dracula. He escapes the castle when it hits him that Dracula is a vampire, while Dracula takes a sea voyage to catch up with Harker's fiancée, Mina, and her friend Lucy. Professor Van Helsing gets on the case too, and Dracula's days become numbered. When we think of Dracula, an image promptly pops into our minds. A black-cloaked man with a slick style, creepy expressions, and a European accent. This image and style was pioneered by the actor Bela Lugosi, who played the titular role in the first official Dracula movie in 1931. Being an ancient villain, Dracula has the maximum impact of vampiric abilities that one can imagine. His vast shape-shifting skills allow him to turn into dust, mist, or any feral creature of his choice. He can convert people into vampires with blood exchange, and his hypnotic stare will lull anyone under. Dracula is also an erudite, well-read man of immense intelligence and wisdom. He is charismatic as he is cruel, and his psychic powers keep him in control of the ones he has sired. Aside from being super strong, quick, and an expert crawl-up-the-waller, Dracula is also a master sorcerer, but he has some vulnerabilities that tend to ail most of the vampire world. Dracula cannot stand religious symbols or garlic, and he will straight up burn upon sunlight exposure. He cannot go into a house uninvited, and must also rest in the soil where he became a vampire, which is why his coffins are layered with it. Okay, next we've got True Blood Vampire. The True Blood series that had hooked viewers with Sookie Stackhouse and Bill Compton's Taboo Love before Sookie began to expand her horizons with all types of creature lovers exposed us to a new era of vampires. These vampires had come out clean about their existence to humans. They were now living on a synthetic blood alternative and mingled among people. The True Blood vampires are akin to the classic vampires in that they are supernatural creatures born of dead humans by a maker vampire. Their origins go back to the demoness Lilith, Adam's first lady who had abandoned him. In True Blood, she is said to be a vampire. The True Blood vampires mostly come across as extremely hot individuals with extendable fangs, with Eric Northman easily taking the crown in that particular category. They have superhuman abilities such as enhanced healing, boosted strength, and flight abilities. But interestingly, they can also candidly mimic mimic other people's voices and have eidetic memories, which allows them almost photographic imagery recall. They are immortal until they are met with true death, the ultimate end that each one of them will inevitably reach. Another interesting thing about these guys and gals is that they are not affected by holy water or crucifixes, and do show up in photographs. These vulnerabilities that exist among traditional vampires are explained as myths in the True Blood world, created by older vampires to protect themselves from persecution. The True Blood vampires are an interesting breed, but the show has an apparent political bent and strong sexual themes, which may not be everyone's cup of tea. Alright, let us jump into Dampier territory up ahead with Blade, or Eric Brooks, the half-human, half-vampire daywalker, was a vampire-slaying hero featured in the Blade movie trilogy, played to steely perfection by Wesley Snipes. He was also featured in a TV series and has recently caused an Omega-level stir in the Blood Hunt comics by becoming a full-blown villain. If I am being generous, I would call it a questionable plot twist by the writers, and it definitely didn't go down smoothly with Blade fans. Blade's hatred of vampires stems from his mother being murdered by one during birth. While still young, he was rescued by Jamal Afari, an aging vampire slayer who became close to him. Afari taught Blade how to control his urges and powers, trained him in combat, and showed him how to hunt down vampires. Blade even took Afari's persona. He began to dress like him and chose double-edged titanium swords as his primary slicers and dicers. Blade has always been one of the coolest Dampiers out there, the #1 authority on vampire killing with his sick combat combos. Being half-human has not impaired his powers in any form. If anything, it has made him invulnerable to usual vampire weaknesses. While he possesses the superhuman physical and healing abilities of vampires, Blade is unaffected by sunlight exposure, earning him the label of Daywalker. Blade does not have a severe reaction to silver or religious symbols either. Blade had acquired some extra powers after drinking Dracula's blood in the Brian Hill's Blade series. Just when I didn't think this guy could get any cooler, he went on and became a crazy shapeshifter. He can transform into a large scary wolf, a swarm of bats, or even a cloud of white mist. I was so hoping we'll get to see some of those awesome developments in the new Blade movie, which has been in the works forever now. But with the Blade reboot recently being removed from Marvel's release calendar, I guess we'll just be moving along then. The Reapers. In Blade's world, there existed an especially rowdy and vicious breed of vampires called the Reapers. The ancient vampire, Eli Damaskinos, conceived this kind to weed out some of the weaknesses vampires have, but instead he ended up creating frantic monsters with a metabolism so high they needed to feed every couple of hours. They could feed on just about anyone. Humans, other vampires, didn't matter. If they didn't get someone to feast on quickly enough, they would begin to eat their own bodies. Ugh, that's some nasty imagery right there. But for the curious cogs out there, you could catch these boys in action in Blade 2 and Blade Trinity. The Reapers are comparable to crackheads in the sense think and organize themselves to follow Jared Nomak's commands. They themselves have not developed speech. They neither have the time nor the need to speak. They interact by snarling and growling. Jared Nomak, the first Reaper who leads the lot, can talk just fine though. The Reapers have the entire vampiric package boosted by their frenzy level though. They are fitted with a unique three-way jaw in which the left and right sides of their lower jaw split open at the chin. Inside it, they have a toothy stinger like the Stryi vampires that does all the blood sucking instead of the regular fangs and the tongue action. The Reapers are not affected by silver or garlic, or the anticoagulant ETDA, which explodes normal vampires. Their sole weakness is sunlight, which incinerates them instantly. 30 Days of Night Vampire. The 30 Days of Night Vampires are the descendants of the Nosferatu clan. The Nosferatu are the apex killing machines that we love our vampires as. There are no frills about these guys. They come to drink blood and kill or convert while they're at it. These vampires were created for a comic book miniseries that spawned the 30 Days of Night film, which garnered decent success. It got a prequel and sequel series called Blood Trails and Dust to Dust, and a follow-up film, Dark Days. Accounts will Council of Elders governed the Nosferatus under their leader, Vicente. They decided to reveal themselves to the human race, only to be persecuted for it. I mean, obviously, no one was going to welcome them to come on in and suck their blood. I don't know what Vicente was thinking here. Anyway, he survives along with some vampires, but they were all left with a bone to pick with the humans. The name 30 Days of Night comes from the original film's plot, which was about a town in Alaska going into a month-long polar night, a yearly natural phenomenon there. But this time, the town is attacked by a horde of vampires led by Marlowe, played wickedly well by Danny Huston. The movie also starred Josh Hartnett and Melissa George as the main protagonists. The vampires in the 30 Days of Night movies and series are cold-blooded killers with shark-like fangs and black eyes. Their skin is often scaled with a deathly rash, and when these monsters are mobilized on a hunt, they are tireless. These vampires have all types of superhuman abilities: super speed, strength, healing, and overall senses. They can even teleport and shapeshift some, but most importantly, they are extremely resilient. They won't necessarily die with a wooden stake. Garlic and silver, even fire, doesn't affect them at all. Though they may lose some skin, they can withstand great explosions such as grenade blast. The only sure-shot way to kill them is direct sunlight exposure or beheading them.
A human?
Twilight vampires. The Twilight books and films are one of the most successful renditions of the vampiric world, hoisted in no small part by the gorgeous, sparkling specimens it portrays vampires to be, not to mention the vampire-human love plotline. The Twilight saga is a somewhat different take on vampires. The Twilight vampires need to drink blood to survive, which is the basic need for the species. But some of them have taken to drinking animal blood. They call themselves the vegetarians as a running joke. Edward Cullen and his family are one of them. Their skin is like smooth, tough marble, wrapped beautifully by young Robert Pattinson, who plays Edward. The vampire's body experiences no aging or growth of hair, nails, or other appendages, and they do not suffer sickness. Their main bodily fluid is a venomous liquid which helps them survive timelessly. Their scent and looks are irresistible to their prey, and their eyes reveal their feeding habits. The vampires that feed on humans have red eyes, and those that take animals have a golden tinge. When a vampire is hungry, his eyes get dark. Interestingly, while the Twilight vampires have most of the super abilities and senses possessed by other vampiric kinds, they do not have fangs. Still, their teeth are razor-sharp and venomous. These vampires are strong enough to uproot trees and crush boulders if the occasion calls for it. They also have a perfect mental recall of the past. Some vampires have special psychic prowess, which allows them to read others' thoughts, bend their minds, and even look into the future. Edward and Bella exemplify the bonding that vampires may sometimes fall into. A vampire in love develops a bond so strong that it diminishes their otherwise overpowering blood loss. One of the very few ways to kill these vampires is to chop their body parts up and set them ablaze so they're unable to reconstruct. Okay, this whole feeding and killing business is getting a tad intense. I reckon it's time for some comedic relief with our next bunch. What We Do in the Shadows vampire. What We Do in the Shadows introduced us to the candid lives of 4 vampires who share a flat in Wellington. They live by the night and do their vampire things, but it is all in great humor. When they are not indulging in some idle banter or sorting out their domestic issues, levitating in the air to vacuum the stairs and whatnot, they take the bus into town and scout the streets for someone to feed on. They have a human familiar who cleans up after them and runs their errands. What We Do in the Shadows vampires are easily the funniest characters in all the lore, and the original New Zealand film is a must-watch. These vampires have superhuman abilities such as hypnosis, levitation, and the ability to transform into animals. But most of the time, they use it in such puny everyday things, it's hilarious. The vampire friends are all different personalities, with their fangs literally being the only thing they have in common. For instance, one of them was a 12th century tyrant ruler called Vladislav the Poker. The man is perpetually haunted by the memory of his old nemesis, the Beast, who is also around town, by the way. At the same time, Peter is a Count Orlok-looking reclusive type who often has these outbursts where he behaves like a feral beast. The American TV series that followed the film did well in keeping the essence of the quirky vampires alive. Though it lacks the edge of the original movie, it's still a curious blend of a joyous and forthright dark comedy. Lifeforce vampires. The 1985 Lifeforce was a sci-fi horror film that attempted to create a vampire origin story. This movie shows vampires as aliens who go from planet to planet, consuming resources and moving on. The Lifeforce story could have been done better, but the alien vampires are an interesting concept. A rescue mission in space finds these gorgeous human-looking creatures in cryo boxes and brings them to London for observation. There, they come alive and wreak all kinds of havoc on Earth. These vampires are large, bat-winged creatures who have taken a human form and wish to conquer Earth. These alien vampires are way too powerful, with state-of-the-art telepathic abilities. They regularly hypnotize or seduce humans and suck the life force out of them, hence the title card. They can turn others into vampires as well, but they keep the beautiful human forms exclusively for themselves, as the horde they turn into the undead looks more like rotting zombies. The alien vampires are always connected with each other on a psychic level. The female vampire is the leader, and the other vampires transfer the life force they have gathered to her, which she is able to transmit to the spaceship, which is in a geostationary orbit above London. That's an insane amount of power. They can also shoot massive energy beams and set places on fire. Eventually, sticking a special sword into them turns out to be the way to take them out. Next, we've got the little girl vampire who is so intense it is scary.
Really? Go!
Let the Right One In vampire. The kid vampire in Let the Right One In is the most eerie yet believable creature you'll find in the world of the undead. Let the Right One In is a Swedish film with a grim storyline that begs to differ. The concept of a 12-year-old bullied boy falling for a 200-year-old vampire who looks like a little girl may seem nuts right off the bat, but as the story develops into a complex, even poetic union of two broken, isolated souls, you cannot help but feel for them. This is one of those you just have to watch it to know. The film spun off a Matt Reeves film in 2010 and, most recently, a TV series that showed the relationship between a father and his vampire daughter. The little vampire girl in the films and series share many characteristics of the classic Slavic vampires. They have extreme endurance to cold and an inhuman scent. They have an aversion to sunlight, and Eli sleeps in a bathtub akin to the traditional vampire coffins. These vampires have superhuman abilities, including flight, crawling over walls, and superior healing, but they also have some unique aspects, like they have normal reflections and cast normal shadow. They are all in deep relationships with one human or more, which suggests they have a good amount of control over their blood cravings. For all their gifts, these kids have some drawbacks. Their human appearances change to a predatory, glazed-eyed look with fangs out when they are in a feeding frenzy or a fit of rage. They can die of starvation or blood loss, and also be killed with a good old wooden stake. Okay, up next, we have the romantics. Only Lovers Left Alive vampire. The Only Lovers Left Alive vampires, Adam and Eve, are as romantic as their names imply, but in a relaxed, known each other forever kind of way. They are immortal creatures that are exactly what they look to be. No shape-shifting and all here. They simply need blood as a dietary compulsion. Adam and Eve are cultured and thoughtful. They consider human blood to be polluted, so they obtain the good stuff from blood banks and other means to live well. Adam is almost like an old-world aristocrat, fitted with the 21st century rock guy look. He is a vampire for sure, but what stands out about him is his sullen, philosophical moments, his passion for music, his thing for collecting vintage instruments, and his contempt for the dilapidated state of human affairs in general. In comparison, Eve's young and reckless sister, Ava, feels more like a regular vampire with an all-consuming bloodlust. While they appear to have superhuman powers, we rarely watch them use them. It's a languid drama about Adam and Eve's relationship, and there's no room or need for superhuman feats. Tom Hiddleston and Tilda Swinton step into these complex characters with padded ease. IndieWire called Only Lovers Left Alive the only vampire movie you need to see. While I don't agree with that statement, the film really shows vampires in a very humanistic light. It's like a bit of new mixed with some of the old, making for a more chill vibe than the feverish creatures we expect. Alright, moving on now to the most interesting vampire on the supernatural plane, Nosferatu. Once you have seen the pale, grotesque creature that is Nosferatu move about in his intense psychotic manner, there's no way you can hold another vampire in his comparison. Nosferatu is his own thing, branching out from Bram Stoker's version into director F.W. Murnau's original Dracula as early as 1922. He has such a strong air of sociopathic seclusion, you're going to need to remind yourself time and again that it's just a movie, and this dude is not real. Both the Nosferatu movies have done such a splendid job of bringing this bizarre character to life that the expectations from the upcoming 2024 Nosferatu film are up in the stratosphere levels right now. The story of Count Orlok shifts from Bram Stoker's original with the insertion of German references in places, but his powers are the same as Dracula's. Nosferatu is a hunchbacked ancient vampire who has lived isolated in the mountains for far too long. His tapering long claws would give any New Age Talon hands a run for their money, and his pale bald head floating over the black robes is one of the creepiest images in the world. His powers are unlimited by vampiric standards, but one thing that always stumps me is how he spreads the rat plague after arriving in Wismar. His evil spreads with such swiftness, sinking the town into severe existential crisis that one must wonder what, if anything, could ever stop him. And that would be Mina and her beautiful throat, in Nosferatu's words. I really hope Robert Eggers explores this part of the story in more detail in the new film, as it would put Nosferatu's foul sorcery front and center, a totally unique and exciting thing to watch. Thirst Vampire, the cinematic artistry that is the Korean movie Thirst, introduced to us by Sang-hyun and Tae-hyu. Sang-hyun was a Catholic priest who turned into a night creature with a faulty blood transfusion, and he turned Tae-hyu into one after killing her later on. But the Thirst Vampire story is not solely about blood-seeking butchery. The love affair between Sang-hyun and Tae-hyu explores a web of human emotions. Their adulterous love affair was a thing of shame, as Tae-hyu is the wife of Sang-hyun's childhood friend. When Tae-hyu claims that her husband beat her, Sang-hyun kills him, but soon after, he finds out that she lied about the beating. The guilt-ridden Sang-hyun kills Tae-hyu and drinks her blood, but he cannot live without her, so he pours his blood into her. She reprises as a vampire, but unlike Sang-hyun, she becomes a cold-blooded killer. She is as remorseless as a vampire as she was in life. Add to that some amped-up vampire abilities, and we've got a woman who is out for slaughtering everyone in her path. Though these vampires are endowed with superhuman abilities, Thirst is more about their human nature. The super speed and flying acrobatics only work as a plot device to show how Sang-hyun's thirst for Tae-hyu pretzels his life out of control until there is nowhere left to run. Thirst vampires are like ordinary, everyday humans in appearance. You should not go in expecting to see a bunch of hot Twilight likes here. Ironically, Thirst's simple cast makes the story of their ascent to power that much more fascinating. Count Duckula. If you didn't think vampires could be bloody cute, you are dead wrong. Count Duckula is not just cute, he is also a vegetarian. If you're sitting there going, this has got to be a joke, you've judged the situation correctly, my clever friend. Duckula is a character from a British children's horror comedy TV show. Count Duckula is basically a ducky vampire, dressed in all debonair Dracula style, the tux and cape. Duckula may be a tad self-centered, but deep down, he's a good fellow who tries to help people, though the events typically turn against him. Count Duckula, the reigning vampire duck, is unlike any other because, well, for one, he loves his broccoli sandwiches. Talk about taking vegetarianism seriously, huh? Secondly, the Count is more passionate about finding fame in the TV entertainment scene than hunting down people for blood. Igor is based beyond himself and religiously tries to turn Count Duckula into a proper vampire. The show is complete with his age-old nemesis, Professor von Goosewing, representing Van Helsing, who refuses to believe Duckula isn't the evil killer his previous reincarnations have always been. The vampire ducks can be killed by exposure to sunlight and driving a stake through the heart, but there is a rite that can be performed once in 100 years that can bring them back to life again. As for powers, Count Duckula commonly uses teleportation to teleport his entire castle with him. It's all fun and games, and if you love cartoons, this adorable vampire will make your day. Okay, let's stop messing around and make way for the killing machines now. Strigoi vampires. The origins of the word Strigoi predate Bram Stoker's Dracula. In Romanian mythology, Strigoi were disturbed spirits that had risen from their human corpses, unable to find rest. These spirits had the supernatural ability to transform into animals and to become invisible. They gained their nourishment by drinking fresh blood. The Strigoi myths have undoubtedly influenced the Gothic horror genre, including Bram Stoker's Dracula. The Strigoi are unlike any other vampire type and have been featured in many books, TV series, and films, most notably The Strain, Vampire Academy, Strigoi, and Far Remote. They are commonly established as the bad vampire in almost all the stories. For instance, the Vampire Academy, they are the evil vampires that show up at night to kill and are too strong for the other vampires to handle. They are paler than the Moroi species and have killer fangs and red-ringed pupils in their eyes. They can, however, be killed with a silver stake or sunlight exposure. The Strain has the most detailed description of the Strigoi. The plot revolves around a viral outbreak. The doctors looking into it find dangerous similarities with an ancient strain of the vampire parasite. As opposed to a pre-existing biology or a dark ritualistic conversion, vampirism is seen as a virus caused by the strain worms. The Strigoi have a stinger under their tongue, an elastic sucking organ of sorts, which they can shoot up to 6 feet to latch onto prey. It can drain the human's blood as well as convert people, turning them into Strigoi newborns. Once turned, the Strigoi lose their hair and fingernails and grow talons. Instead, their complexion becomes chalk white, they grow fangs, and the vampire signature is now complete. The Strigoi stay hot, unlike the other species. At 120 degrees Fahrenheit, they radiate heat which can be felt by humans as they approach. They're super fast. Their movement may appear as a short blur to humans. They possess super senses, and though they cannot speak coherently and are truly non-sentient, they are still great telepaths, and they use this ability as a weapon. They send off the murmur, a psychic shockwave that can make people faint. Their weaknesses are few, but aside from the sun and silver, Strigoi can also be killed by head or spinal trauma. Daybreakers vampires. The Daybreaker vampires come from a world where civilized vampires have taken over, and the human race is just about wiped out. The vampire hematologist, Edward Dalton, played by Ethan Hawke, and his colleague develop a human blood substitute. A sequence of events brings Dalton to discover a man named Lionel Cormack, who was once a vampire but now has been cured of vampirism. He was exposed to sunlight on accident for a short duration before plunging into water, which helped him survive and also turned him back into a human. After some gruesome trials, Dalton is cured, and they discovered that a cured human's blood could cure other vampires too. This is a novel take on vampires, not just in how they can become human again, but also in how the world looks with vampires at the helm. We've got underground tunnels for roads, UV-filtered cars used for daytime commutes, and so on. Also, the society is organized much like a human society, barring the feeding needs. There are still some blood-deprived undead that turn aggressive and wild, called the Subsiders. Daybreakers vampires look and act exactly like humans. They don't have any special superhuman abilities either. They do, however, possess a higher threshold for pain and can smell human blood from quite some feet away. They have fangs inset within their mouths and no heartbeat, just like the traditional kind. However, the blood-deprived Subsiders are absurdly hostile and conjure up some superpowers. They are super strong, can crawl walls, and have wings to help them with some hang time. Hellsing vampire. The vampires in the manga vampire series Hellsing are the arch enemies of the namesake secret organization aided by a true vampire, Alucard. The members of the Hellsing are on a forever mission to destroy these undead creatures who bite human virgins of the opposite sex and turn them into servant vampires to propagate their species. Like the broader species, they have red eyes and extended fangs to quench their thirst. These vampires have a clear hierarchy among them. At the top of the food food chain, we've got real vampires. They are followed by servant vampires, artificial vampires, familiars, and ghouls in that order. The real vampires come primarily from Alucard's bloodline. When vampires try to convert same-sex virgins, they turn into ghouls. Artificial vampires are different in that they were created with an experimental artificial procedure. Hellsing's vampires have super strength, speed and reflexes, a hiked pain threshold, and a great healing factor with regenerative cellular biology. They can mind read those they have sired and also have great psychic ability. But the Hellsing vampire's immortality is conditional. It depends upon their soul tank, so to speak. The souls they collect over time from their prey can give them a life even if they are fatally injured. They could still live on while one of their familiars takes the fall for them. Real vampires have a larger share of almost all abilities than artificial ones. Also, artificial vampires can only convert prey into ghouls, not vampires, regardless of the prey's sex. The vampires are sensitive to holy symbols. Sunlight and silver weapons will bring them down point blank. Stabbing or impaling through the heart will also kill these vampires. Dark Shadows vampires. The television soap Dark Shadows, which was later converted into a movie directed by the incredible Tim Burton, centered around the Collins family that has a werewolf, a ghost, and a vampire to help them in their business and personal battle against a powerful witch. Sounds like everything you need in a film, right? Dark Shadows is a very entertaining movie, complete with some of that dark humor only Tim Burton and Johnny Depp put together can stir up. Barnabas Collins, the ancient vampire played by Depp, has all the wonderful vampiric traits: pale skin, fangs, dark eyes, and tapering talons. He dresses up in sophisticated fits and is ultra refined in his savagery, while Barnabas behaves quite like a regular vampire, feeding on the innocent when he needs to. It's all done with such dramatic flair and comic timing that you never take things too serious. It's easy to root for Barnabas, as he really is doing only what he needs to survive and give the Collins an upper hand over the witch, who is played devilishly well by the stunning Eva Green. Barnabas rising from his coffin after a whole century and trying to get his cultured 18th century butt to get on with the hippie 70s culture is a trip. Not to mention the weird new Colin progeny subplot. Super fun. Vampires fan or not, Barnabas is a treat to watch for all. Buffy the Vampire Slayer vampires. Buffy the Vampire Slayer was an exciting TV show that set off after a 90s spell. It ended up creating plenty of spin-offs, comics, and video games. Buffy Summers, played by Sarah Michelle Gellar, was a vampire slayer who lived in Sunnydale, a place teeming with all sorts of supernatural creatures. The vampires Buffy would pound down were demons inside a host human bodies. They were hybrids, demonic, non-sentient beings but with a human component. The demons inside cannot use human speech and do not have much of a personality, but they take on the memories and demeanor of their human host to varying levels. The presence of vampires in Sunnydale is known to the public. There is a group of vampires that classify themselves as reformed vampires. These vampires would only drink the blood of those who wanted to get bitten for the high they got from a vampire bite. But there was also the vampire supremacists, who considered vampires as higher creatures and humans as mere sheep. Lastly, there was a mindlessly aggressive vampire called the Zompires. These vampires would reproduce via blood exchange, and the vampires would maintain a psychic connection with their sires. Despite their overall zombie-ish appearance and lack of pulse, the vampires are immortal to the extent that they cannot die from natural causes. The vampire's true face emerges over the human face when they are riled up with rage or excitement. These vampires are super strong and fast, and Angel, probably the hottest, most famous vampire ever on television, moved so fast it was like he was teleporting. They are incredibly athletic and can heal faster than humans. Some vampires are adept in hypnosis and can shapeshift into animals and mist. However, these vampires share the same weaknesses associated with most vampire kinds, such as wooden stakes, fire attacks, garlic, exposure to sunlight, and so on. However, some higher vampires, such as Angel, have been known to achieve invulnerability to these things for short periods. marvelous verdict. Since the unofficial entry of Nosferatu in 1922 and the first Dracula film in 1931, vampires have been a household horror name, and lore has expanded, creating some of the longest-running screen franchises in cinematic history. Vampires are creatures of the night that have evolved hammed-up predatory senses to work in the dark. These creatures have no heartbeat, symbolizing their undead nature, and when they're thirsty, their sense of right or wrong goes right out of the window, almost across the board. Having said that, some vampire types have found a way to live at peace with humanity. There are even whispers of vampire rights in some series, which take bits and pieces from the modern political climate of the West. The vampire's ancestral weaknesses have persisted in most kinds, though. They will still suffer damage from Silver's mystical purity, stakes, and sunlight. Vampires in modern media are so different. They range from charismatic to seductive to absolutely deranged and hideous. So do tell us which is your favorite kind and why down in the comments section below. And if you liked this video, please give us a thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't already. And do us a favor, stay out of the dark, will you? Take care, Marvelous fam. Bye for now.